one thing, we started off doing episodes with just the two of us to kind of get our sea legs and having conversations, and then started layering in guests.
Yeah.
And that was the other discovery that I think was really important, because I know we had some tension, Jodah, between, we wanted to focus just on our conversations versus guests, and we had a little bit of tug of war there. And then once we started bringing in the guests, I think we both found that they brought a nice layer and a different perspective to our conversations. And one thing I really appreciate that I think we're going to be continuing to strive for is, with us all being, because of one of the benefits of COVID-19, and there are benefits from what happened with COVID. Yes, it was a tragic 3 years that we've been through, and lots of people died, and horrible. And we're not even going to get into the culture war stuff, but there are some tangible benefits, like our increased use of technology for good, right? And one of those is that we can now interview people, because we're all accustomed to using this technology. We can interview people all around the globe. And so I'm thinking one of our first international guests was Zoe Fragou, who is in Athens, Greece. She's an Athens, Greece-based psychologist working on her PhD in psychology and organizational leadership. And having her on really kind of opened my eyes to, we can bring really interesting thinkers from all around the world together to build a community of folks to engage in these discussions. And I think that's one thing I've enjoyed about having the guests on.
Yeah. And we're still, we're still feeling our putting, or what did you say, our sea legs, but the guests are great, and they're great for, I'll say, for very, very practical reasons. They're easier shows for us to do because we don't have to plan quite as much, because we can lean on the guests to sort of help kind of drive the show. So it kind of usually helps me and Dan throughout the week, so we don't have to put as much sort of effort in actually driving the entire topic. There is that part, but having, like he said, having them on opens up the dialogue, and it's a great way to kind of get at topics in a way that we probably never would have considered it. And it opens up future topics for us down the line.
Because I think one thing we're going to try and do as we go into next year is look at some of the episodes that we've already done and think about what are some points that we can extend. One thing we've been doing, because we've been publishing a lot more shorts, which if you're a podcaster, I'd recommend doing the shorts thing, because it actually works to get more views and clicks and stuff like that, and more attention, because we are in an attention economy. But we have been using that Google Analytics and the data, the YouTube data, to look at what are people interested in, what are they viewing again and again, to pick out future topics. So I think that's something that we're going to do too. And I've discovered some themes, Jodah, that I think have been surprising and informative. Like, one is the theme of the importance of storytelling that has come up again and again. And here, in a sense, that's what we're doing right now. We're constructing a story about our experience together with this podcast.
That's right.
To make sense of it.
And what about empathy? There was empathy is also one that's we've been running with, and having people feel that in the world around you and the people that you work with.
Yeah, no, empathy has been a huge one, and I want to get to that in a second. But I think, we're going to have, as we go forward, we're going to have some of those people who spoke to us about storytelling, like Zoe Fragou and Hannah Gala and Hassan Sorrells, all spoke to in different ways. They all spoke to the aspect of storytelling and how important it was. For Hassan, it was looking to great literature. And Zoe too. For Zoe and Hassan, they both spoke about, they both echoed, like, you don't read management books. Hassan went even further and said, the MBA.
Yeah. Wait, did he say language. That? Are you sure?
He basically did.
He said, "Hassan, we're not saying you said that, but I think we're paraphrasing."
It's a paraphrase. Anyways, he said, "Forget the NBA and read a book of literature, read Shakespeare or Jane Austen. And Zoe, recommended Milan Kundera, which I know Jodah's been reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being because of that conversation.
That's right.
Although I still say Immortality is the better book from Kundera. But they're both great. And it emphasizes that there's a lot to learn from literature about leadership. And I think that's a theme I definitely want to continue to explore. And then Hannah really got into the evolutionary aspects of storytelling and how, we are terrible sense makers. That's one of the challenges of being a human being. We're not very good at making sense of the world. And so if we're constructing stories based on flawed data that we're gathering about our existence, then our stories are going to be flawed too. And so there are benefits to storytelling, and there's also dangers to storytelling.
Well, and then we even one of the episodes we did by ourselves was actually this notion of a post-industrial workforce or environment, which I definitely want to drive more from. What was the gentleman's name? Wicket
Veek.
or Veek? Yeah. And I mean, his whole premise is like, hey, everybody, I hope you're sitting down for this. But his whole premise is that leaders aren't there to set the direction or tell you what to do. Well, no, let me rephrase that. They are there to set the direction, but they're not there to tell you what to do. Their primary role is to set the narrative by which then the expertise, which has been hired below, or probably a better term than below, but has been hired to execute. They take that narrative and they're all working towards that same narrative. But the leader himself is not the person who's actually saying how to execute and where to go with that execution. It's a team effort. And whether you agree with that or not, it puts a lot of emphasis on storytelling for the leadership out there currently in today's world.
Yeah, and that's a sense-making process, right? And because he calls it that the post-industrial organization is a sense-making organization. You're gathering data and you're constructing narratives based on the data that you're gathering about your environment and your situation in order to move forward. And so leaders need to create an environment where that data can be collected and that we can co-construct the narratives that help move us forward. That was a fascinating episode. I definitely think we should keep pursuing that strand of thought as well.
Yeah.
And then there is the empathy part, as another theme, which I thought, Brad Topliff spoke to that pretty deeply. And
I think Hannah brought up empathy as well. I think there was a conversation, and then Dan Torres talked about it as well within his conversation with us. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, no, they came up again and again, and empathy is an interesting thing. And I was watching another podcast recently, which I'm not going to name because it's a different type of podcast. But they had a guest on who challenged the idea of empathy and said that you should really be focusing on sympathy. And so that's an interesting debate that might be interesting to have.
I find that
later on in the podcast.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we want to talk about it now, but it's funny because of our conversations. I've always, me doing what I've done, I've always been about empathy and sympathy, but empathy in the sense that you can feel for the person that you're making something for or helping with. But because of our conversations, I had never heard of the terminology. What'd you call it? Negative empathy or dark empathy?
Empathy, yeah.
Dark empathy. And I was like, what the heck would be dark empathy? But then it makes complete sense. Just because you can.
Well, that was a real discovery, though, and that speaks to the sympathy thing, right? Like
that's what I was saying. That's what I'm talking about. It made me realize that empathy into itself is not it's like a bad analogy, but like a gun. It can be used for good or a bad, I guess, and it was like, so then I started thinking maybe sympathy is actually the thing that you want to actually be thinking about. I haven't listened to what you talked about, but when you said that, I find that very fascinating. Again.
I think that person's argument was that empathy could be, you could delude yourself with empathy, because how can you really walk in somebody else's shoes? Because that's really what empathy means. Like, I'm walking in somebody else's shoes. I'm experiencing what they're experiencing. And that could delude you could have some delusions produced by that type of thinking, like
Right.
really being convinced that you are empathetic, when in fact what you might really be just doing is just being sympathetic, which is imagining, what somebody else is experiencing.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Or even if your
So
empathy could be misdirected, you might think you have empathy, but your emotions are actually not empathetic, just some of the other emotion that isn't really tied to what's happening to them. So, yeah, no, very, very fascinating stuff for sure.
yeah, and so there were other themes that came up too, and I definitely think that that's one that I want to explore too, more deeply. We are going to get back to the Bitcoin and blockchain conversation with Mr. Key that he had. He's going to bring on one of his partners to talk with us. I'm still skeptical about blockchain and Bitcoin. That episode was called, initially was called, uh, Explain Bitcoin and Blockchain to Dan's grandmother.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I do find it still a mysterious thing. And now with the FPX or FTX, whatever, that Sam Bankman-Fried fiasco, I'm even more skeptical about blockchain and Bitcoin.
Yeah, we want to find. We definitely want to speak to more people out there around this notion of technology. We have a good friend between me and Dan who's full on in this whole Bitcoin thing, and that episode we did with Mr. Key was one of his favorites, and he felt that we didn't get it, and he's probably right, that we were walking away from that probably not completely as on board with what we had heard as we probably should have been. It's the disruptive nature that they're expressing is probably extraordinarily profound. And when we think about it, how it can change in the world, the working world as we know it, it's not just about, when you talk to these people about this coin, it's and it's about functionally changing the mechanisms of transaction, of causation, and then how does that affect the world as we know it. And so as we move forward, in this world, we're going to be there'll be this deluge of new technology that's going to change the way we engage with our work, change the way work engages with us. And will our organizations, will our leadership, will our government be able to move fast enough to accommodate these changes? I would be arguing that they haven't been up to this point, which is a little scary to me. But can we help? And can we help be part of that conversation? So we will definitely be looking to speak to more people with around these new technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's blockchain, whether it's info security. What does all this mean to the world that is increasingly becoming interconnected through the technologies, and not just connected, guided, if not just
Yeah.
guided, led by the technologies.
Well, the world's going to be disrupted by a lot of these technologies, or is in the process of being disrupted, which is something that Mr. Key was trying to get at with us. What's the future of middle management?
That's right.
Was a question that we tackled, and I think he said there won't be any.
That's right.
Because I think there's one thing I want to explore when we have Mr. Key and some other guests back to talk about the blockchain and by extension crypto conversation is kind of this libertarian streak that's within that community. Because I definitely think there is a political, ideological, psychological mindset that the blockchain and cryptocurrency appeals to, which is more of a libertarian mindset. So I could see where not everyone's going to buy into crypto. Some people want a strong state to give them security and help, and that's kind of a more liberal position, right? Whereas the people who don't want any state control of their assets and their assets, basically, they're going to be more inclined to pursue something like crypto and blockchain and decentralized commerce and finance.
That's you know what? I never thought about that connection. I both agree and disagree. Where in the sense I agree, but I think it's a bit reductive. But that is interesting because there is that aspect to it, and I'm wondering would you have to lean libertarian to bite onto these technologies? I don't think
I think
so.
if he's,
No. I'm just saying. Like I said, I'm not saying that it doesn't feed into it, but I don't know. Maybe now's not the time to talk. But that's interesting. I never thought about.
I think it's the thing to explore more deeply at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of disruptive technologies, I was thinking about our interview with Christine Ng, who we talked about data analytics and marketing with her. And one of her focuses of that conversation was the importance of using data to make decisions. And she comes from the realm of marketing, so she was using data through that lens. And she talked deeply about Google Analytics. Well, we now see Google suddenly challenged with the chat's CPG bot, right? That new chat bot that's out, which, we experimented, Jodah, you and I did some experimentation with it over the weekend, and it's pretty damn impressive. And if it can outdo Google in a search, that's going to be very disruptive to the type of data that can be collected, right, on people. Because that OpenAI, from my understanding at this point, is probably not collecting a lot of data. I'm sure it's collecting data. Let's be clear. You're putting in questions, it's answer. It's collecting data, but it's not collecting data and delivering it to other people in the way that Google Analytics does, which Google delivers data so that people can look at it like us, who are doing a podcast, and kind of refine your marketing strategy to enhance the delivery of the product that you're trying to get out into the world.
Yep.
And so I can see it totally disrupting marketing and the whole data analytics area in the marketing field.
Yeah, that's going to be probably one of our topics a lot this year, I'm assuming, if not directly, indirectly. It's definitely opened everybody's eyes. Everybody's talking about it.
I want to hit the final theme was just overall mental frameworks to think about our reality. We talked about with Tina Greenbaum and Young Suk Ko about mental frameworks. Young was was actually our first guest. Brave Young, thank you for being our first guest and going through that trial by whatever.
And she was great. She brought some class and calm demeanor to the whole frenetic aspect that we were in those early days. So yeah, it was awesome.
And she spoke to empathy too, right? And care. And she has a metaphor about using gems, like thinking about your life like a diamond, and you have to care for that diamond, even in the workplace. And so she brought that, and that's a mental mindset, I think. And then also Tina Greenbaum with mental mastery mindset, which kind of gets to that whole stoicism and how you as a leader have to emotionally regulate yourself, which I think is another topic that we'll be getting into as well with future guests. How the leaders emotionally self-regulate, participate in self-care and promote self-care and mental health and well-being in the workplace, because a lot of folks still need it now.